Project Planet. Today we're going to dive a little further into the loneliest whale in the world. As the so-called loneliest whale in the world, you might wonder, how did we identify it? How did we even find it in the first place? In the late 1980s, the US Navy was using this technology that was previously used during the Cold War to listen for Soviet submarines, so it was a sonar technology. After the Cold War, that technology continued to be used just to monitor things, and we've also found that it's very helpful for scientists to use for oceanography and things like that. The individuals who would monitor this system were used to picking up sounds like the sounds of boats, or tectonic plates shifting, or normal whale calls. However, one day they picked up a call that sounded like a whale call, except for it was at a much higher pitch than you would typically expect from a whale call. Baleen whales, which baleen is a sort of keratin-like substance. It's almost like hair that you will find as a replacement to teeth in some whales' mouths. So these are things like blue whales and fin whales. Baleen whales typically call at a Hertz level of somewhere between 15 to 25. So every whale call of a baleen whale will fit somewhere in that frequency range. This particular call that they were hearing was measuring at about 52 Hertz, so it was way beyond the range that you would normally expect for a baleen whale. The individuals who were monitoring the system were pretty stumped because it sounded kind of like a whale call, but it couldn't have possibly been from a species that they already knew of, and yet they couldn't write it off as a mechanical noise either. However, at the time, these recordings were then classified because they were being taken by US Navy technology, and it was during the Cold War. They were classified, put away, no one could access them. Several years later, the recordings were declassified, meaning that anyone could access them. This is when a team of researchers from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, particularly William Watkins, took notice of this particular recording and thought that it sounded like something they wanted to investigate. Because of the detailed nature of the recording and the data that the US Navy took when they first encountered this call, the team of researchers was given a good starting point as to where it was first heard and was able to kind of listen to the recording and make some hypotheses about what might be making this call. As we previously talked about, there is a type of whale called a baleen whale. There's also a type called toothed whales. Scientists were able to rule out toothed whales because they typically communicate with echolocation as opposed to a long-distance song or call that can travel through the ocean. They were also able to rule out things like sperm whales, orcas, or dolphins because they communicate more with clicks and shorter sounds as opposed to a longer call. The scientists came up with three main hypotheses. Number one, the whale could be an existing type of whale that just had some sort of vocal anomaly that caused its call to sound different from other whales. Number two, it could be a hybrid whale, which would be a cross between a fin and a blue whale, something that we haven't seen before, but it could be an explanation for why the call sounded different. And number three, it could be a type of whale that we hadn't even discovered yet, which sounds crazy, but the ocean is so large that this was a real possibility. After beginning the search, this team of researchers spent almost a decade looking for this whale on and off, and they would hear it in occasional spots, but not really be able to track it or locate that specific individual. As you can imagine, they had kind of a tough time getting funding for this sort of research because a lot of people suggested that perhaps the whale was already dead, and many people weren't willing to fund it because it felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. You're not just looking for a pod of whales, you're looking for one singular individual, and we don't even know exactly where it was. So it was kind of a tough challenge for these researchers to be able to get the green light to go on a search for this particular whale. The team continued to search for the whale, research into what it could be, publish papers about it, etc. In the 2010s, the whale started to gain some traction through social media and articles about it because people were very intrigued about this whale that could be calling out for years on end with no one in response. It was a sad story, it was a mystery that people wanted answers to, and it tugged on people's heartstrings. While they were struggling to find people who were willing to fund research to identify this whale, a filmmaker heard about the story, was really moved by it, and wanted to fundraise on his own to create a documentary. He was able to raise about $400,000, which seems like a lot, and to us it is. However, it's not that much when you're considering a research expedition where you need boats, technology, manpower, etc. So they still had limited time to be able to go on a search for this whale. The researchers had been monitoring this whale's call and were identifying locations that had been much further north, like Canada and Alaska. When they were getting ready to go on this expedition, an intern who was also monitoring the audio and the call identified that the whale was calling from a vicinity close to Los Angeles. This was a challenge because the researchers previously thought they had a good concept of the area to search for the whale because it had been showing up in these northern waters. Now it was somewhere entirely different, so they were beginning their search somewhere with a lot less data. The next biggest issue with this location is that the areas where this whale call is popping up off of California is right in the middle of one of the largest shipping lanes in the world. When cargo ships come through, they create a lot of noise, and we might not hear it above the surface, but under the surface, it's very loud, and it has been known to disrupt whale calls, their echolocation, and their ability to communicate and migrate. Despite these challenges, the research team decided to still set out and try to go locate and identify the 52 Hertz whale. They again used retired US Navy technology, so they were able to put out some sonar beacons, and these sonar beacons would take a sound, such as the whale's call, and bounce back in that direction, so they could see what direction the sound was coming from in relation to the beacon. By putting out multiple beacons, they could see that the sound was coming from one direction of one beacon and one direction from another, and follow those directions until they met the crosshair, which would be, hypothetically, where the 52 Hertz whale would be. Of course, when you're trying to track a moving animal, even getting to that crosshair doesn't mean that the whale is going to be there, but it allowed the team to get closer and closer to that individual. This process worked extremely well, and the research team was able to continue getting closer and closer to the location where the 52 Hertz whale should be. Just as it looked like they were going to be closing in on being able to possibly even see this 52 Hertz whale, an extremely large cargo ship came through the shipping lane. The ship may have been pretty far away, however, sounds travel extremely well underwater, so whale sounds are able to travel for many, many miles, just like the sounds of the cargo ship are. This interfered with the technology they were using, and they were not able to continue tracking where the 52 Hertz whale was. They finished out their expedition and unfortunately were never able to get any closer to identifying or sighting this particular whale. So they headed back to land because they had run out of money to continue on this expedition. But they continued monitoring recordings that they had taken at that time and recordings of real time when they were back on land to see if they could potentially hear where this whale was again, and maybe if they were able to go back out on a further expedition, they could locate it. Through monitoring these recordings, they continued to hear the 52 Hertz whale call frequently. They were able to look at those calls, see the locations that they were coming from on a map, and see that the whale was calling from a similar location to where they had been looking. Now, they weren't able to go back out and find the whale, so it remains unidentified. However, in listening to these recordings, they were able to see that the whale had called from one location and also another location hundreds of miles away within a very short time frame. This led them to the conclusion that it could not have been the same whale making this call. The whale could not have traveled that distance and that amount of time to have been able to make both of the calls that they heard. This means that there is at least one other 52 Hertz whale out there. In addition, the scientists had heard many reports of fishermen and people on the ocean seeing whales that looked kind of like a blue whale, but kind of like a fin whale in the area that this whale had been heard. This tells them that their hypothesis of the whale being a hybrid, and that being the reason for its call sounding different, is the most likely conclusion. It also gives us a very important piece of information, which is that there are hybrid whales out there, and there's at least two. So while we don't know exactly how many there are, it is very likely that there are more of these hybrid whales out there. Researchers don't know how many of them there are. There could be many, many more. There could be just the two of them. But the important thing is that the loneliest whale in the world is not actually lonely. There is another whale out there that it can communicate with. The team of researchers continues to research and hopes to find or spot this whale sometime in the future, or at least one of the 52 Hertz whales. So although the point of the expedition was to locate one and they weren't able to do that, they were able to tell the world that the loneliest whale in the world is not actually lonely. And in many ways, that's just as important.